Hi, Liz Whiteacre here to talk about how being a responsible researcher affects writing in college and careers. This week in the class, we're taking a look at how we define plagiarism, identifying different methods to avoid it, and thinking about how we can apply brainstorming strategies to get us ready on our first paper in the course. So what is plagiarism? You've heard about it in classes before this one, but a lot of times we don't spend enough time talking about it and considering how even little unintentional acts can lead up to some pretty serious problems. Here in the cartoon, we have a student coming up and saying, "What do you mean all my facts are wrong? I copied everything straight off the internet." And well, it's funny sad, right? That's what we want to avoid, just copying everything straight off the internet, regardless of what information might be useful to us there. We need to synthesize that information, process it, and think about how we are presenting it to our audience. So plagiarism happens when you take credit for other people's ideas, words, images, music. It's more than just copying and pasting some text off the internet. It can also be stealing somebody's joke, right? You hear something funny, you repeat it to somebody else, and you don't happen to share, "Oh, yeah, Bob told me that." And Bob hears you tell your joke, right? That was his, maybe 3 hours earlier in the day. And that can make Bob kind of angry and sad and annoyed, especially now you look like this very clever person and you've not given any credit for Bob who fed you those very clever lines. So it can happen in our personal lives, and it can also happen when we are presenting our work academically and also professionally. So why should we care? Let's visit this site, plagiarism.org. We're going down to the college and graduate area now. Looking at these statistics, right? And plagiarism.org down here lets us know what article they're pulling this from. A university study did this, so they're sharing their source with us. They're also making sure to include direct quotations around the material that's coming directly from that article, and then they've summarized some of the information provided as well. And summary is taking those ideas that Donald McCabe's team at Rutgers University put together in the article that was published and put it into their own words. So plagiarism isn't just about taking something verbatim, but it's also about the ideas that we're borrowing from other people. And if you take a look here, which I'm sure you've been diving in while I've been talking, 36% of undergraduates admit to, quote unquote, paraphrase copying a few sentences from the internet source without footnoting it. So essentially taking some sentences here and there and putting it into their paper without letting people know where they got those sentences from. We're going to be taking time in our reading this week, and as we start our project, How to Be a Responsible Researcher in College, what patch writing or paraphrase plagiarism is. And it's something that a lot of people don't necessarily realize they're doing if they're not following up with proper citation when they're borrowing those ideas and words. So this is happening. You may get through this unit and realize, "Oh, well, I never just took a paper off the internet and told somebody it was mine," right? I never blatantly cheated on my test, but I think I've done paraphrase plagiarism before. I feel awful, right? So we're going to talk about different strategies that you can do to make sure that you are a responsible researcher, not just while you're in college and your academic assignments and tests, but also how you build those good habits and carry them forward into your professional life and your professional writing. We care about plagiarism because there are a lot of consequences. They're the ones we think of first when we are caught plagiarizing in school, like you fail the assignment, you get a 0. Or the faculty member might ask you to redo the whole thing on your own with a particular deadline if you want to maintain your status in the class, or if you want to try and get a passing grade on the assignment. You might also be put through your university's formal punishment process, which often starts with a form that the faculty member passes onto the department, or perhaps student activities or the registrar. It depends on the school you're in. At UIndy, it starts at the department level and then moves up to the university level, and a committee of faculty from across the university takes a look at the case of plagiarism and also sees whether or not the student has been caught plagiarizing in other courses, and then decides what the best course of action is. It can even lead to expulsion from school if that's deemed the most appropriate action. So it's very serious. In addition to that, when you're looking at plagiarism outside of your course, just Google, right? Plagiarism, job loss, and you're going to see instances where people have plagiarized and have been fired from their positions. People have been sued over copyright infringement, those sorts of things. We're going to take a look at a few cases in our textbook Sky Pack for real things that have happened to real people very publicly. We're not focusing on this to make people edgy, right? Or say, oh, look, those people, they just got caught, right? They aren't as smart as I would be in that situation. But to help us understand why it's important that we make a commitment to being a responsible researcher right now, first term of college, and develop the skills we need to maintain that personal goal. A responsible researcher is someone who takes the time to find and use quality sources. That means checking the information that you want to use in your paper, your project, etc., presentation, and making sure that they were responsible researchers. We just looked at plagiarism.org and we saw they are linking to the sources that they're presenting. They're letting us know where this information is coming from, and they've selected those statistics from a reputable research team that has a reputation for doing great work. So rather than just picking the first thing that pops up in a Google search, you're taking time to make sure that what you're selecting is ethically sourced, if you will, so that your readers know that you are curating great information that they can trust when you put those in your project. And it takes time, so it definitely takes a commitment to take sometimes a little bit harder path. Another thing that a responsible researcher does is presents the source material carefully to avoid misrepresentation or misinformation, rather than just taking a sentence that sounds good and pasting it out and putting it in your paper. Is that within the context? Are you still presenting that person's original idea in the same way? So that's something that we need to be careful of. If you take a picture like this one right here, was it intended for a conversation like this? Or is it suddenly mean something different because we've stuck it into a PowerPoint slide that it's not really supposed to be in? So paying attention, making sure how you're using information makes sense and doesn't cause confusion or misrepresent something. And then also making attribution. If you take a look at this picture I've included on the slide, I have a citation there to let you know where the graphic has come from, and also to let you know what its Creative Commons license is. Those are things that we're going to talk about in this course when we're working on your blog, and then at the end of the term when you're working on your multimodal research paper, incorporating graphics and hyperlinks and the like in your final research project. It's also someone who participates in a wider conversation rather than just going out and cherry picking good quotes and throwing them into a paper that sounds good. You know, lots of different terms for people call that when they're trying to just whip something together real quick to make a deadline. But you're adding to a conversation when you're taking that information from Rutgers and you're thinking about the rampant use of plagiarism, when you're thinking about what that means and starting to include that into your paper or presentation, etc., you're trying to include that context and that other conversation in your own work. So letting people know where those sources are coming from, what are conversations about plagiarism that are happening in other areas, and how does it relate to the point you're trying to make to your readers. There are lots of different strategies that we're going to focus on in this course to help you build those skills to be a responsible researcher. It doesn't happen overnight. You've come into the class with a lot of great skills, so we're going to talk about refining those and then adding on to that so that you're very flexible and ready for any situation in the future. But being able to employ good time management skills, I listed first because that is one of the key ones. When we think about reasons why people resort to plagiarism or cheating, just flat out taking someone else's paper and saying, yeah, I wrote that, right? They're all different, a huge pendulum, right, of ethical and unethical behavior. And there are lots of different ways to misrepresent your work. So time management, making sure you can meet your deadlines, you have plenty of time to be able to do the work you need to do in the right way. That makes a big difference. Using different research strategies, understanding that if you want to be able to find X information, it might be more appropriate to go to Google Scholar than it is to go to the databases at the library, or emailing someone, an expert, to ask them some direct questions. Figuring out the best way to get information is going to help you immensely. And then applying criteria for what information you want to use. What makes something trustworthy so that when you're using it to represent you, you can feel really confident about that. Ways to read critically to find the information you need efficiently. Taking careful notes. A lot of times unintentional plagiarism happens because of sloppy note taking. You're reading an article, you might be copying and paste stuff you want to use into a Word file. And if you don't put the direct quote marks around it at that moment in time, or you don't put in some sort of citation to remind yourself which article that came from, it can be really easy when you're typing in there, working on your paper, to forget, oh, that sentence came from that source. It didn't come from me when I was pre-writing or outlining my paper. Focusing on relevant evidence, making sure that what you're including in your writing is helpful to your readers. It's not just about saying, hey, look at all of the sources I can find and quote, right? Instead, it's, hey, look at these illustrations, look at these examples that are so perfect for the point that I'm trying to develop here. And then also making attribution. In this course, we're going to be talking about using MLA, or Modern Language Association citation style, but we'll also be talking about different ways to provide attributions. For example, in your blog, what does it look like to give credit when you're writing in something that's a little bit more casual? And then also providing context, making sure that when you are including a hyperlink in a blog or including some statistics in a paragraph you're writing, that your readers understand what that information is and why it's being included. I know it's a super exciting term. You're going to be able to check all of these things off the list. Okay. And the last thing I want to think about at the start of this week is shifting from academic to professional writing. Everything that you're doing in this class is going to transfer not only to other classes you're taking at the university, but also to those first jobs, internships, different extracurricular activities that you're experiencing in college and leading towards that first career path job when you graduate. So we want to focus on developing good habits. You're going to be introduced to 5 or 6, 12 different ways to take notes. It's up to you to explore and try them out to find what are the note-taking styles that work well for you, right? Because it's not a good note-taking style if you don't use it and put it to practice and it makes sense. And right, so you're going to have to decide what habits you want to develop. I'll be presenting some general umbrella topics that you'll want to consider, and then you'll need to explore this term to figure out, well, this works best for me in this situation, and then, oh, this works better in this situation. Search strategies. It's very important that you become flexible with the way you find information, especially in college where you have access to our Cranit Memorial Library resources that you won't necessarily have when you graduate. So not only developing your database and catalog search strategies, but also how do you find those quality sources outside of a university setting so that you can continue to in your career when you're professionally writing, rely on really high quality sources. And we'll be talking about that when we're working on our big research academic project, including those kinds of sources, and then also when you are writing your blog project. Attribution expectations. If you're not using MLA style or APA style or CBE style for your professional writing, what do you use then? And we'll talk about how you can navigate those waters. Dissemination means how are you sharing your work, and sometimes the way that you're sharing your work will affect, as we learned with our rhetorical situation discussion last week, how you choose to write up and share your work with your audience. And then your reputation. If you are practicing excellent, responsible researcher writing, reading skills in college, you are going to leave college with fantastic letters of recommendation. You're going to have a reputation of being somebody who is a go-to communicator and someone who is very trustworthy. And so working to build your reputation as a great, ethical, responsible communicator, researcher now, it's going to set you up for being that person in your career. You're not going to graduate and magically have it all fall into place and happen if you've not been practicing it for the 4 or so years leading up to that. So looking ahead, let's check my notes here. This week, you're focusing on brainstorming your first paper, your responsible researcher paper. You'll be pulling the sources from SkyPack, so make sure that you look at this week's module and read that before you start your brainstorm. And then next week, you're going to be writing that essay, so get your brainstorm in on time so you could get some feedback before you execute your plan. Now, you can use whichever strategy of brainstorm that works best for you. And I really mean that. Different people have different strategies that click. So when you take a look at some of the suggestions in the book, use the one that works best for you. And if you don't see a specific strategy discussed in SkyPack, that's okay. If you perhaps used cluster maps in high school and that is your go-to, that's okay to use for this particular assignment. And if you have questions about what you want to do, feel free to send me a message through ACE, and I'm happy to talk about it before you get started. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to get in touch, and I can't wait to see your plan for your essay this week. Thanks.